The word of my testimony for which I was slain. Chapter 35. I told my dream to a person I had respect for, the dream of falling into the chasm. We were at a men's retreat, and I told it to him as we were walking to an open space to toss a softball to each other. He was a big guy, and he may have had a shot pitching in the big leagues if it hadn't been for an injury in college. I finished telling him the dream and put some space between us to play catch. He wound up and threw a knuckleball right at my face so hard I could hear it the moment it left his hand with a loud whizzing sound, and it had a random flight path. I felt lucky to catch it cleanly. No joke, that ball could have killed me. I wasn't happy. What the heck, man? He just gave a little chuckle. I ended our game of catch having not even thrown the ball back. Now, years later, and for other reasons, I've had a nagging feeling he is one of the many pagans disguised as a Christian. But after I voluntarily stayed home, virus was a joke, to stop the spread of my anger, I had been making progress. God had begun to reveal wrongs done to me that were the real issue with my struggle to forgive. I experienced a huge spurt of creativity. I finally was able to write the third and final movement to a piano piece I had started over a decade earlier. That spurt continued strong all the way up to just months ago when it seemed to ease enough for me to catch a breath. I dusted off the music notation software from way back to finish my masterpiece, and since then I've written in the neighborhood of, 100 songs, most all of which are instrumental. I asked God at the outset, while diving deeper than I even knew existed in music theory, why I felt so obsessed with music now. Scripture came to mind and said, God said, let there be light, and then, let us make man in our image. And then remember being rightly taught that there is a written record of everything we've ever said. Well, I understood the physics of sound waves. I pondered Tesla's experiments with mechanical resonance. The Spirit confirmed my conclusion. Just as God's speaking sound or voice has the power to make matter and all we know, our voice and even our thoughts are what writes the record onto the fabric of space and time, or better said, onto His creation. The physical sound waves we emit by speaking never stop moving through the universe. I must conclude, then, that when God says He can hear our thoughts, that they must also create a physical sound wave that writes its record just as our voice does. But I digress. There was another facet to the wild ride of creativity that I'd been on. I'd picked up woodworking. I began with trying to whittle a block of wood into a chain, progressed into sculpting logs, and settled into stuff I could make with normal woodshop tools. Wanting to integrate sound and woodwork, I set out to make wind chimes, tuned, of course. I brainstormed for a cool way to hang chimes from, and decided I would try building various shapes from geometry. In the process of learning angles and trying to pinpoint what I wanted to build, I came across platonic solids. They are 3D shapes that are seen in nature. There's a game that uses dice shaped like all of them. I was introduced to the term of sacred geometry. Well, that sounded like something I had been warned against. I couldn't help noticing the mathematical relationship music and geometry seemed to have, so being confident in the Spirit, I wanted to see why and what sacred was supposed to mean to whoever named it that. Maybe there was a good reason some church leader made some kind of warning. I didn't find anything demonic. The worst thing that maybe I could see is that all the references it made to God were also tagged with consciousness or whatever. I was okay with God. I chose to make a dodecahedron, the shape with 12 sides. It came out pretty cool. Open sides, you can see through it. Thinking I wanted to paint it, I thought about King Jesus and went with purple because I'd heard somewhere it is the color of royalty. Whatever. I knew what, if any, of its symbology meant to me. Haven't learned anything iffy still about it. So I continued learning more about the subject, eventually lost interest in it. But just a few days ago, while reflecting on my chasm dream after I wrote it, I realized that I had described the first two shapes of sacred geometry. In my dream, the second shape was before the first, but now I was curious to the representation in sacred geometry. Ideas long established and maybe sometimes very broad, but nonetheless. I already pointed out the first shape, but wanted to wait on its meaning until I could write this so you could know how I came to the place of seeking the information. The first shape, the chasm, was very distinct to me. Also, the second is called the Vesica Piscis. It's the shape you get when overlapping two of the other shapes in my dream, which is the circle and dot. When the Vesica Piscis is formed with circles side by side, we get what they call the cosmic womb, and it's understood as divine feminine in nature and as the place all life in the universe comes out of. The circle and the dot are seen as divine masculine, where the dot in the center represents the one God, and the circle is God's consciousness that emanates out of him. So humor me. What I'm about to say isn't intended as proof for my cause in any way. If my already established hunch or gut feeling about my friend I told this dream is true, that he really is pagan and he was familiar with dream interpretation standards, then it may be reasonable to conclude he got the message that I had no clue existed. And at first glance, God was evident and clearly a focal point because the circle and dot. And in my dream, I had stood face to face with God and had deep, meaningful connection or communion with him. And because of it, my life had been set on God's path. To my friend, imposter, it said, God is for me. I could possibly conclude that knuckleball he threw was his way of checking if it was a correct interpretation. And if I'm right about pagans being the root of deception Jesus spoke about, all of them are in on it while we've been clueless. Is it possible my friends saw another interpretation as well? You see, to get all the sacred geometry shapes represented in my dream, you need a second circle and dot combined with the first to arrive at the Vesica Piscis shape. And that the Vesica Piscis shape was in my dream indicated the second divine masculine was also present, so that to my friend it was a key to exposing their longest-standing deception. Father masculine, son masculine, and spirit feminine. Now, I admitted before I had to use several inferences to arrive there. Allow me one last inference I touched on earlier. Would God send my or his enemies a message or warn them through me in their language without me having any idea what he was doing, and nearly 40 years later show it to me for encouragement? How many coincidences before a thing really isn't coincidental?